In this video, I'm going to show you how to crochet this beautiful fall inspired shell stitch beanie with all the tips and tricks. So let's get started. Hey guys, welcome to DIY Crafts. For this project, I'm using ombre yarn, which is a 4-ply medium weight 100% acrylic yarn from Loops and Threads along with a 4.5 mm crochet hook. Now let us begin by making a slip knot. Wrap the yarn around your fingers and from the center of the loop, grab the working end, pull up a loop and pull the starting tail end to make a knot. So that's a slip knot. Now let's begin by making a foundation chain. So we are making a ribbing first and then we will work all the way up to make a beanie. For this I am making chain 20 plus chain 2, so that's chain 22. If you want, you can make less ribbing by reducing the number of chains for the foundation chain. However, this is the adult size, like it's for me, so 21 chains will give you a good ear padding. Now let's start making the first row. We'll put a stitch marker in this chain 2, like the 22nd chain, to mark the beginning of the first stitch. Here in each row, whatever height chain we are making, we are counting it as a first DC in the row 1. So for the row 1, skip 3 chains from the hook and into the 4th chain, insert your hook and make a first double crochet. So insert and drop a loop. You will have 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2. So that's a DC. And now you're going to repeat the same thing. Pull up a loop from the chain and then make a second DC. So that's 3 double crochet stitches, and we are going to continue to make double crochet stitches in all the chains until the last chain. So that will give you the first row of ear padding. Now I'm making the last double stitch of the first row. So that's the first row of double crochet stitches which we are working for the ear padding. Now let's start making the second row. Begin with chain 2 and from the second row onwards we are going to ignore that height chain. So now chain 2, turn your work and we will be starting to do the first double crochet stitch in this first stitch. So in every stitch we will have both the front and back loops. So from the second row onwards we are going to work only in the back loop, leaving the front loop. So insert the hook into the back loop of the first stitch and make your first DC in the second row. And this one is the first stitch. The DC is the first stitch in the second row as we are ignoring the chain 2. So we are going to mark that DC with a stitch marker. And now from the next stitch onwards we are going to continue to make double crochet stitches by putting a needle only into the back loop. So that's a back loop only double crochet stitch. And we are going to continue to make all the double crochet stitches throughout the row until the last stitch. Now we have to make a last double crochet stitch of the second row. So for that, remove the stitch marker. Identify the stitch from which you have removed the stitch marker, and in that chain put your needle and make your last double stitch of the second row. And the count, the number of stitches in the first row should match with the number of stitches in the second row. And you will see a small ribbing pattern that is formed because of leaving the front loops. Now for the third row onwards we are going to repeat the same thing that we have done for the second row. So begin with chain 2 and you are going to ignore that chain 2 as a stitch. And now start making double crochet stitches by leaving the front loops and working only in the back loops. So that's the first double crochet stitch. Now put a stitch marker to mark this first stitch of the third row. And now we are going to continue to make back loop only double crochet stitches throughout the row. So it's just like how we have done the second row. So this is a 1 row repeat, the ribbing pattern, and you will going to continue to like that towards the end of the row. So here again, that's the last stitch we have to do. So remove the stitch marker. Here you will have both front and back loops of the previous row double crochet stitch. Now remove the stitch marker and identify the back loop of that stitch and then make a last double stitch of the third row. Now that is the third row. Again, for starting the fourth row, begin with chain 2, turn your work, and that chain 2 you have to ignore it, yarn over and insert the needle only into the back loop of the first stitch and start making a double crochet stitch of the fourth row. Again you will put a stitch marker on the top of this double stitch. So every time you start a new row, begin with chain 2 and make a double stitch and then put a stitch marker on top of it. And likewise you will continue to make to and fro double crochet stitches until you have the length that meets your required circumference of the cap head. So for me it's around 22 inches. So I'm making a ribbing which is approximately 18 inches around, because it will have a nice stretchy texture. You don't have to make exact, it will become loose. So let me show you with the measurement. So it is approximately 9.5 inch, which is double. If it's double, it will be around 18.5 to 19 inches, and my head is around 22 to 23 inches, and the stretchiness will cover up for the rest of the tightness. And now we have to join the first row with the last row. So the foundation chain and the last row are arranged as shown in the video, and now I am pulling out the working end out of the foundation chain as shown in the video. Now once these two are joined with each other, make chain 1 and turn the work. Now I am going to join these two sides using a slip stitch join. However, you can use a single stitch join, or you can use a tapestry needle also to join these two sides. However, I felt slip stitch join is much more easier. So insert the hook into the first stitch and also the foundation chain, and then make a slip stitch, and you're going to repeat this. So insert the hook into the next stitch and also the foundation chain, both at a time, yarn over and draw the yarn through all the loops on the hook at the same time. And like this you have to repeat the slip stitches throughout the last row to join both the sides, and this will complete the ribbing part of the cap. Now we are going to make the last stitch of the join. And whenever you are doing the ribbing part, like in a to and fro method, make sure you work them in an even number of rows, so that whatever join you have made, that will actually be invisible from the other side. Even though there is a join on the front side, when you fold the ribbing part, it's mostly invisible, and it will mix up with the rest of the pattern. So that's the reason we almost do the to and fro patterns in even number of rows. Now ribbing part is completed. Let's work up for the cap part. For that we are going to make a single crochet stitches around the ribbing part. So in one row you will have a chain 2, and in the next row you will have a DC. So across these DC and the chain 2 spaces, you will make 2 single crochet stitch over each stitch. So identify the chain 2, and in that chain 2 make a 2 single crochet stitches, and then in the next stitch, that may be the DC, in that stitch make 2 single stitches. Again in the next chain 2 make 2 single stitches. Like that we'll make a single crochet stitches around the ribbing part, and this will give us a baseline for making our shell stitch for the rest of the cap. And we are going to continue this throughout the row until the starting point where we have started making a single crochet stitches. Now I am making the last 2 single crochet stitches over the DC, and now make a slip stitch on the top of the first single stitch, and this gave the first row of the beanie, on the top of a ribbing. Now let's start making the second row, and from here onwards we are going to start the shell stitch pattern. So begin with the first single crochet in the first stitch, then skip 1 chain, and in the next stitch make 5 double crochet stitches in the single stitch. So that's second double stitch, 3, 4, and one more double stitch in the same gap, so same stitch. So that's the 5 double crochet stitches in one single stitch. So this is called as a shell stitch. And now skip the next stitch, and in the later stitch make one single stitch. So this is the repetitive pattern. We will make one single stitch and then one shell stitch with one stitch gap in between each stitch. So as we have completed one single stitch, in the next stitch skip one stitch, and in the later stitch make a shell stitch. Shell stitch is always 5 double crochet stitches worked in the same stitch. So it's a kind of 5 DC shell stitch. So that's 5 DCs. Now skip the next stitch, and in the later stitch make one single crochet. So insert, drop a loop, yarn over and single stitch, and then again skip the next one, and in the later one make a shell stitch. Always find out the count. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. And then again you will skip the next one followed by a single crochet, and likewise you will continue the work throughout the row. So skip one and then one single stitch. Again skip one and then make a shell stitch. And here I am making the last shell stitch. That's 3, 4 and 5. Now identify the first single crochet, and in that stitch make a slip stitch. So this completes the second row. Now you will see a nice shell stitch ripple pattern over the gap. Now let's start making the second row. The third row. So here in the third row we are going to alternate the position of the shell stitch and a single stitch, which means on the top of a single stitch we will make a shell stitch, and on the top of a shell stitch we will make a single stitch. So for the first shell, begin with chain 3, which we also count it as a first double crochet, and in the same stitch, that is on the top of the first single stitch, make 4 more double crochet stitches to make a total of 5 DC. That means that 5 DCs will make the first shell stitch. Now skip 2 stitches, that is identify the middle double crochet stitch of the previous shell stitch. So on the top of that middle stitch, put your needle and make a single crochet. And now we are going to repeat this pattern, like on skip the next 2 stitches, and in the later stitch, that is on the top of a single stitch, make a shell stitch. So that's again 5 double crochet stitches in the same stitch. So that's 2, 3, 4 and 5. And now again skip the next 2 stitches, and on the top of the shell stitch, like the middle stitch, in that make one single stitch. And now we are going to repeat this pattern throughout the row. So again skip 2, and then in the next single stitch, on the top of the next single stitch, we are going to make a shell stitch. That's 5 DCs. That's 2, 3, 4 and 5. Again skip the next 2 stitches, and in the middle stitch, on the top of the third DC, make one single stitch, and now repeat it throughout the row until you have the last single stitch. So on the last shell, insert your needle and make your single crochet, and now make a slip stitch on the top of the third stitch, the third chain, to complete the second row. And if you see, there is an alternative pattern of the shell stitches. Now we are going to slip stitch and go until the middle stitch of the shell stitch. So we have to make 2 more slip stitches to reach the middle part of the previous shell stitch. And here is where we will start making the third row. So begin with 1 single stitch. That is the middle point on the shell, so we'll make a single crochet. So if you want, you can just put a stitch markers to identify where you have to do the slip stitch by the end of the row. Again, you will skip the next 2 chains, the 2 stitches, and on the top of the single crochet you will make a shell stitch, so which is a repeat of your second row. So now we have to repeat row 2 and row 3 alternatively until you have the required number of rows. Okay, so here we have completed the shell stitch on top of a single stitch. Again we will skip 2 stitches and then make 1 single stitch on top of the previous shell stitch, and again skip 2 stitches and make a shell stitch on top of the previous single crochet stitch. So that's 3, 4 and 5. Again skip 2 and then make a single stitch on top of the previous shell stitch. Again skip 2 and continue, and now repeat this pattern of row 2 and row 3 until you have the required height. So I have made up to 10 rows with the same pattern, and if you want to check the height, fold the ribbing pattern in half and use your tape measure and check the height from the last row till the tip of the ribbing. And now my cap measures around 7 inches. So here I am going to stop this repetitive pattern, and then I am going to decrease for the next couple of rows to get the shape of a beanie on top of the cap. So for that I am going to decrease the number of stitches. How to do that? Let's see. So here I am starting with the row 11, and I've already done the chain 2. So that's chain 3. I'm counting that as a DC, and now I'm going to make a decrease in the next 2 stitches. So instead of a regular DC, I'm using an invisible DC. So insert the hook into front loops of next 2 stitches and do a usual double crochet. So that will give you a decrease. Again in the next stitch, make 1 DC. Again on the top of the next 2 stitches, I'm going to make an invisible decrease. So insert the hook into front loop of next 2 stitches, drop a loop and make a DC, and I'm going to continue this pattern of 1 DC and 1 decrease throughout the row. So that's 1 DC and then 1 invisible decrease. Again in the next stitch, make 1 DC and then 1 invisible decrease, and you're going to continue this pattern throughout the row until you reach the starting point. So here I am making the last invisible decrease, and then make a slip stitch on top of the first stitch, that is on top of the 3rd chain. And this completes the 11th row, and if you see, the pattern will slightly shrink. Now I am going to repeat the same thing for the next row as well. So do you see that slight shrink in the shape of the pattern? And for the next 2 rows also I am going to repeat the same pattern. So let us begin with chain 3. You can count this chain 3 as a double crochet, and now we are going to join the invisible stitch, like the invisible DC, around the next 2 stitches. So that's 1 decrease and then 1 DC, again 1 invisible decrease. So insert the hook into front loops of next 2 stitches, drop a loop and perform your usual double crochet. And now we are going to repeat this until the starting point. So I am making the last invisible decrease. So sometimes you might get 1 stitch extra, just like how this happened right now. So even if that happens, it doesn't matter much. You can just continue with the last double crochet stitch. If you want, you can stop it here. If not, you can just continue with the another row of decreases, because if the gap is so big, even if you weave in all the top, like all the stitches close to each other, there will still be a lot of gap. So to reduce that gap and to give the neat finishings, I'm just going forward and making one more row of decreases. But if you wish to stop it here, you can stop it here. So for the last row, I'm again starting with a chain 3, and I'm doing the same pattern of 1 DC and 1 decrease, and as I'm counting this chain 3 as a DC, I'm doing one more decrease. So that's 1 DC, 1 decrease, and repeating the same pattern throughout the last row. 1 DC and 1 decrease, and continue the pattern. So here I am making the last DC of row 13, and once it is done, insert your needle on the top of the third chain and then make a slip stitch. So if you see, because of this last couple of rows with decreases, the opening on the top has almost reduced. And here also you can decide if you wanted to stop. If not, you can just add one more row, which is completely optional. Here for the last row, again if I do double crochet stitches, the cap height will increase a lot, so I don't want that. For that reason, I am using a half double crochet stitches. So I just made a half double stitch and then one half double stitch decrease. Again it's an invisible decrease. So insert the needle into front loops of next 2 stitches, yarn over and draw the yarn through all the 3 loops on the hook at the same time. And again I am making the half double crochet stitches throughout the row. So here I am not following any pattern, it's just decreases all the way. So this will even helps to reduce the stitches and get them closer to get that beanie shape on top of the cap. Continue the decreases throughout the last row. Even if you are left with one single stitch, it's all right, it's okay. You make one half double stitch in that last stitch. Once it is done, make a slip stitch into the first half double stitch and then chain 1, and now trim the thread by leaving a little long tail end. Then fasten off, pull up a loop completely out of the last chain 1, and that's the fasten off. Now if you see the shape on the top, it's nice curvy and it's in a perfect cap shape. And on the top, the opening is very less, that we can easily sew that open part using the tail end which we have left. And now let's take a tapestry needle and close the opening part on the top. The beanie now measures approximately 8.5 inches to 9 inches. So it's a nice, warm, bulky beanie. Now let's continue with the last row. Let's sew it together. Take the finishing tail end into the tapestry needle. And now, as shown in the video, weave in and weave out alternatively on the stitches of the last row throughout the row. So weave in, weave out, weave in, weave out until to the point where you have started the tail end. Once it is done, gently pull the tail end so that the opening on the top will be closed, and then secure it with a couple of knots. Even if you are not sure, even if you see a small gap on the top, you can just randomly sew the last row stitches closer to each other so that the hole will be mostly invisible. And after that, secure the thread by making some more knots, and then bring the finishing tail end inside of the cap, weave in the tail end, and then trim the excess thread close to the project. So couple of stitches you can weave in and then trim the excess thread. Adjust the stitches, and that's the base of your beanie is now completed. So to add on, we are going to make a small pom-pom on top of it. For that, I am just taking 1.5 meter or approximately 2 meters of the brown color yarn, and then wrap it around your fingers for around 30 to 40 times and secure it with a small piece of yarn. After that, trim that, and then you have to open the twists. If you have a ready-made instant pom-poms, you can attach it on the top of the beanie. If not, you can just prepare the pom-pom as shown in this video. So I gently untwisted the yarn and slowly brushed out to make it a fuzzy pom-pom. Once it is done, you can just give it a nice trim to make the pom-pom look even on all the sides. And now let's attach this pom-pom on top of the cap. Just use the tapestry needle and attach it on the top of the beanie. And now on the inside of the beanie, you can just secure these threads around couple of stitches by making a couple of knots. And after that, you can gently weave in all those tail ends into the nearby stitches and then trim the excess threads close to the project. And that's it. Your fall inspired shell stitch beanie with the added ear padding is now ready. I hope you all enjoyed watching this tutorial. Do give this pattern a try and let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. The written pattern is given in the description. Do check it out. Share your work to me on Instagram. See you guys in the next video.
Thank you for watching. Please like the video, share it and subscribe to DIY Crafts.